Hello everyone, what is up? It is me, AlbyMTG. For today's video, I would like to explain to you guys, share my experience with you guys about how when you go to mtggoldfish.com, look at the modern metagame, and then scroll down on the recent events on the right hand side, why my name shows up with the word first chilling next to it, and why if you go to starcitygames.com and click on the recent deck list from the Invitational Qualifier in Williamsport, why the same thing occurs on these two big websites, MTG Goldfish and Star City Games. Obviously, you can tell already from the title of the video, we're doing a tournament report on my victory at a Star City Games Invitational Qualifier. This was a modern event where I played Infect. I'm going to go ahead and talk about all of my matchups that I had in the particular event, reasons I played certain cards in my deck, and all that other kind of stuff. So without further ado, we're just going to go ahead and hop into it. These are some of my favorite videos to make. I don't get to play as much competitive Magic as I'd like to, but honestly, this gave me so much motivation. The fact that I got the chance to finally play more competitive Magic again, and then when I got the opportunity to do so, I made the most of it by coming in first in this event. Really makes me want to play a lot more competitive Magic, so it's likely that you guys will be seeing more tournament reports here in the near future. But with that being said, we're just going to go ahead and start off by taking a look at the deck list here on Star City Games. As you guys can see, it played some Infect. Infect being the mechanic, of course, where you only have to deal 10 damage to your opponent instead of 20 if it's done through poison counters via the Infect mechanic. So you play cards like Blighted Agent, Glistener Elf, as well as Inkmoth Nexus, which are all creatures that have Infect. Inkmoth Nexus, once you activate it and turn it into a creature, then it has Flying and Infect, so you have a little bit of evasion for the Inkmoth Nexus, a lot of evasion for the Blighted Agent because it's unblockable, and then Glistener Elf, just a 1-mana 1/1 with the keyword on it. So that's how we're going to defeat our opponent, and the way that we make it go really fast is with a bunch of pump spells. We have cards like Become Immense, Blossoming Defense, Groundswell, Might of Old Krosa, Mutagenic Growth, Vines of Vastwood, Distortion Strike, and out of Modern Horizons, we got a very, very big upgrade to the deck, which is 4 copies of Scale Up. This card is just absolutely fantastic, and it enables a lot more turn 2 wins than the deck had previously. And so I really think that Infect was just in a really solid spot. In terms of other things, I ran a little bit of interaction, 2 copies of Spell Pierce here, as well as 1 copy of Dismember. Just a little bit of interaction, the Dismember for the creature decks, Spell Pierce for the non-creature decks. 1 Spellskite as well I ran in the flex spot because Spellskite is really good against Jund in particular. I felt like there was going to be a lot of Jund up here at this particular tournament because I've played at the store before and know that there's a lot of players who like those decks that are more mid-rangey, grindy, and so I was expecting a lot of those. I actually wanted to run an additional Spellskite in my sideboard, but when I went to buy one at the counter, they didn't have any additional copies of Spellskite, so I had to make a last-second change to my sideboard. I think I still, in hindsight, would have liked to have the second Spellskite, but ended up working out, so I can't complain too much. And then in terms of the mana base, we're playing 7 fetch lands, 2 Misty Rainforest, 1 Verdant Catacombs, 2 Windswept Heath, 2 Wooded Foothills. The reason that you play the different fetch lands is to play around Pithing Needle, but aside from that, there's not really any reason to play different ones. I think right now it's also very reasonable to just go with something like some number of Windswept Heath, just like cut out the where is it, the Misty Rainforest in general, and just run some combination of Windswept Heath, Wooded Foothills, and Verdant Catacombs as your fetches to either signify that you're potentially the Bant version of Infect, or that you are potentially Jund if you just play Fetch Land Pass. There's a lot of people who will think that, after just seeing like a Verdant Catacombs pass the turn, there's a lot of people whose minds will just go instantly to Jund, expecting that to be the deck that your opponent's on. So that's something that I think that could be changed, is the choice of fetch lands in the mana base. In terms of the basics, I ran 3 snow-covered forests. You don't have to run snow-covered basics, but I think 3 forests is pretty good. There's a lot of people who will run 2 forests and then 1 Dryad Arbor. I chose not to run a Dryad Arbor in the 75, and it actually worked out really well for me for this particular tournament. Dryad Arbor is great against Liliana of the Veil because once they tick down to make you sacrifice a creature, if you have a fetch land in play, you can quickly fetch up the Dryad Arbor. Dryad Arbor is also pretty good against things like Death Shadow, where players don't really care too much about their life total, and they might just swing in thinking that, you have no way of dealing damage. They can put their life total as low as you want, and then you quickly fetch up a Dryad Arbor and then just like give it 1 pump spell and kill them out of nowhere. So I do like it in there, but I felt like there wasn't going to be much Death Shadow, which I was correct about. There ended up not being any Death Shadow at this tournament, which was nice. Not needing to play around that. And I think that's basically everything. 2 Waterlogged Grove as well from Modern Horizons is great. Gives us, we don't care too much about our life total because we're going to kill our opponents faster than they're going to kill us. So the ability to potentially draw cards once we're flooding out is really nice. And then Pendlehaven, a lot of our creatures are 1/1, so you can see it gives a 1/1 creature +1/+2 until end of turn. Once we activate the Inkmoth Nexus, it's a 1/1. The Blighted Agent, it's a 1/1. Glistener Elf, also a 1/1. Only one that's not a 1/1 is Noble Hierarch and Spellskite, so works perfectly fine as an additional pump spell in this deck. Also, as green mana, doesn't enter the battlefield tapped, which is also really important for a non-basic land here in this deck. And then just 2 copies of Breeding Pool that we can fetch out when we need access to our to either a green or blue mana with our fetch lands, being able to find those. So that is basically the entire main deck. As we look to the sideboard, we'll talk about the matchups that I expected to see there and why these specific cards are in my sideboard. So we'll start off with 3 copies of Grafdigger's Cage. This is for your graveyard decks, things like Hogaak, things like Griselbrand, where they're trying to reanimate a Griselbrand out of the graveyard. Those sort of things. Dredge as well. It's a fine card against them. So those are kind of matchups where I like Grafdigger's Cage. It was my choice of Graveyard Hate. There's a lot of players who are just all in on 4 Leyline of the Void right now. With Hogaak, of course, not anymore because Hogaak's banned. But at the time that I was doing this, this tournament took place the day before the banned and restricted announcement. So there was still plenty of Faithless Lootings and plenty of Hogaaks going around. So that was my choice of Graveyard Hate. Just 3 copies. I actually don't mind my matchup against Hogaak too bad. I prepared for that matchup way more than any other matchup. Did a lot of testing, figured out what I needed to do specifically to win the matchup against Hogaak. There is a bit of luck involved in terms of like play draw, those sort of things, but I had a good sideboard plan going into the matchup against Hogaak, and I felt like I could play that matchup pretty well. So I was fine with 3 Grafdigger's Cage instead of 4. Next up, we have 2 Pithing Needle. Pithing Needle, I think, is just really good right now, or at least it was at the time. I also think it's just going to be really good coming up, too. But Pithing Needle is really good against Walking Ballista, which is one of the cards that Infect struggles with the most. So we can name off Walking Ballista. There was a lot of Urza decks at the event, too, so you can name things like Goblin Engineer or Thopter Foundry. Those are great activated abilities that you can name with a Pithing Needle. Also against the control matchup, naming things like Teferi Time Raveler, Jace the Mind Sculptor, Teferi Hero of Dominaria, Narset, whatever Planeswalker you want to name with this Pithing Needle, Celestial Colonnade as well, if you want to. Just a ton of great names with Pithing Needle. Maybe if you're against Tron and they go turn 1 Expedition map pass, you can go ahead and name off that Expedition map with the Pithing Needle. Pithing Needle is just great. Next up, 1 copy of Ichorclaw Mirror. I bring in the Ichorclaw Mirror against the matchups that are really grindy, so things like Jund, where they're going to have a ton of removal spells, and so having an additional Infect creature in my deck could be pretty relevant in terms of me being able to, have an Infect creature on board to actually win the game. Next up, 2 copies of Wild Defiance. These are really good against the red-based strategies. So your Is It Phoenix decks, your Mono-Red Phoenix, Burn, Mono-Red Prowess, those sort of things. The decks that are trying to kill your creatures with cards like Lightning Bolt, Lightning Helix, those sort of things, those are the matchups where Wild Defiance really shines, because it just means that they can't do it. It gets +3/+3 whenever they target it with a spell, or whenever you target it with a spell. So it's just a great card. Kills your opponent really fast and protects it from the red-based removal spells. 1 Ceremonious Rejection here to counter a colorless spell. I originally had 2, but then I just, in testing, found that my matchup against the decks like Tron and Eldrazi Tron were just so good that I didn't actually want the 2nd Ceremonious Rejection, which ended up being really key because it opened up an additional flex spot in my sideboard the night before the event. So that actually ended up being really key here, and I'll talk about the spice that ended up becoming. Next up, we have a Dismember comes in against the bigger creature-based decks. One thing that I actually did that I think a lot of people would not have thought about doing, or possibly done even the exact opposite, was against the Hogaak decks. I actually don't bring in Dismember, and I take out the Dismember that was in the main board. Dismember just doesn't do enough in the matchup. It kills a Vengevine, but I'm taking 4 life to kill that creature that's only going to deal 4 to me anyway, and because the matchup is so fast, the decks just don't, like, that four life could be the only time that Vengevine was going to hit me anyway. So the Dismembers just don't do enough in the Hogaak matchup. I think a lot of people would just see it as like, oh, my opponent's playing, a ton of creatures. Dismember's a removal spell. I didn't see it like that. I end up taking the Dismembers out against Hogaak, and it ended up proving pretty well for me throughout the course of the day. Next up, we have one Dispel. I wanted another card to bring in against the creature-based matchup, and this was actually the card that I brought, that I put in last second instead of the additional Spellskite that I wanted to play. So this was just, a fine card. Counters an instant. It's 1 mana interaction to potentially protect the creature. It's perfectly fine. I'm going to skip over this one because this one is the true spice, so I'll talk about that one here in a second. We have 2 copies of Return to Nature. Return to Nature is so good. So it's 2 mana. Oh man, my subscription to Norton Security has expired. What a shame. Alright, we got Return to Nature here. 2 mana instant. Choose one. Destroy target artifact, destroy target enchantment, or exile target card from a graveyard. So, destroying an artifact, what's really great about this is, Infect is super bad against Chalice of the Void, and so there's a lot of players who will just, snap off Nature's Claim in their sideboard as their artifact removal of choice for Infect, but that can't kill a Chalice because it's 1 converted mana cost. So I chose to play Return to Nature instead, as just paying my respects to Chalice, not wanting to lose to Chalice. It does destroy enchantments as well. We don't really have a ton of enchantments that come in against us, but even against something like Blue-White Control, they sometimes run cards like Detention Sphere, where bringing in this card is perfectly fine because they have additional hits for it too, so you can potentially blow up a Detention Sphere, or you can exile a card that's currently being targeted by a Snapcaster Mage that's in the graveyard, so it's a fine card to actually bring in against the control matchups as well. And then, of course, things like Tron and all the other artifact decks that are running around, you can just bring this in, blow up some important artifacts. And then we've got 1 copy of Distortion Strike, which is a very good way of beating the creature decks, things like humans, elves, which was a deck that I got to play against. Hogaak, I bring in the Distortion Strikes against Hogaak as well. Yeah, basically just anything that's running a ton of creatures. Goblins, I bring it in against goblins as well. I'm just trying to think of like all the creature decks in the format, but you guys get the point. And then finally, the last piece of the sideboard that we have here is 1 copy of Reality Shift. This is a 2 mana instant that says, exile target creature, its controller manifests the top card of his or her library. I know what you're thinking, Reality Shift sounds not great, but it fits a very niche role that I needed it to fit, and it did it absolutely perfectly. So with Reality Shift, I needed a card that hits Hogaak and also hits Plague Engineer. And in green-blue, that's not something that you can find extremely easily. There are some cards like, the green-based cards that'll say, like, kill a or exile a black thing, like a black creature or black permanent, whatever. But Reality Shift was my choice because it does more than just come in against the black decks. It also comes in against things like Eldrazi Tron. Also overperformed last night at Modern Night Monday. I was up against Griselbrand. My opponent threw the breached a World Spine Worm, and I exiled it with a Reality Shift. So they got a 2/2 instead of their 3 World Spine Worm tokens that they were expecting to get. So Reality Shift was a nice piece of tech that I thought quite a bit about because I needed it to fit the niche role of dealing with both Plague Engineer and dealing with Hogaak, and this card just fit perfectly. So that is my 75 that I played for the event, and then we'll go ahead and talk about how the event went. So there was 37 players in total, and so an odd number means 1 player gets a bye the first round, and we were running hot already. We got the bye in round 1, which was actually super crucial. Getting able to not only just relax a little bit and then see what other players had brought to the tournament, but um, being able to scope out what other players were on was so important. Getting able to just kind of get a taste of what the meta in the room was like, seeing if it was going to be a good day for me or not, or if like the entire room was just full of burn or something like that. Basically, what I found was there was quite a bit of Jund, quite a bit of Urza, Hogaak, um, burn, and there's one more big one: Hogaak, Jund, Urza, burn, and blue-white control. Those were the 5 big decks that I saw, and then aside from that, everything else was just either a 1 of or a 2 of deck. But getting to kind of get a taste of that, know what hands I was supposed to keep against certain players if I got to go against them, and I was able to also see more specifically, or important to me at least, was that I know I was going to be starting out 1-0, so I know who some of the better players at that shop are, so I was able to watch some of some of the turns of their games, see what strategies they were on, and those sort of things. Maybe even get to see a couple of sideboard cards in the in the like game 2s and game 3s that they were playing. So that was really crucial as well, and definitely a huge benefit of having the buy in the first round. So started off hot, 1-0, and then we are on to round 2, where I played against the matchup that I wanted the most. When I walked into that room, I had another friend go with me. His name was Zach. Zach, I appreciate you. Zach actually gave me an extra sideboard dismember because I didn't have one, so I appreciate you, Zach. You are part of the reason that this week, or this tournament in general, just went very, very good for me. But he was Man, he was just a great help to have at the tournament, and I told him beforehand that there was one matchup I really wanted, and that matchup was Hogaak. I wanted to be the guy who walked into there and said, "Give me the tough matchup. I'm not scared of it. Card's gonna get banned tomorrow. I don't care. Give me this tough matchup. I want to send Hogaak out the way that it should and just beat down on Hogaak players all day." I felt like I practiced the matchup a ton, and I was ready for this matchup. So ready for it. And so I went up against Hogaak in round 2, and I ended up winning 2-1. I won game 2 and game 3. I won both of the sideboarded game, or no, I apologize. I won game 1 and game 3 against this Hogaak player. They actually had a little bit of a different list. They did not top 8 the event, so I don't have their specific 75. But from talking with the person afterwards, they had significantly more interaction than this list in particular here in their main. They had the 2 fatal pushes, but they also had 2 Assassin's Trophies, so 1 additional one here. They weren't playing Shriekhorn, and they were playing less number of Lotless Trolls, so that they also had 2 copies of Collective Brutality in the main as well, which was super good for them. I was not expecting Collective Brutalities out of the main from Hogaak. It's just something you don't normally see, but it played out very well for them. And then I executed my sideboard plan exactly the way I wanted to. I got, I brought in the Distortion Strikes, the Grafdigger's Cage, those sort of things, and just beat my opponent as fast as I possibly could. I was able to race down some Hogaaks and some Vengevines and managed to get there. So I was up to 2-0 then in the tournament after beating Hogaak. Then after Hogaak, that's not the deck that I played against. Don't worry about that. You guys didn't see that. The next deck that I played against was actually someone else who top 8'd the event, so I do get to show you their full 75. We'll be looking at Jaren Haberstrach's Jund list here. I played against him in round 3. I said going into it that Jund was my worst matchup. Not even my worst matchup. I guess the red decks are probably a little bit worse for me, but Jund's pretty bad, and then like the other red base removal spell decks are pretty bad for me. And Jund just has a lot of ways of, just beating me. Run in 6 is a heck of a magic card. The way that I was able to even steal one game off of Jund against him, I did lose 1-2 in the best of 3. But holding up Pendelhaven every turn to protect my creature against Ren in 6 was very crucial, because Ren in 6 just destroys every card in my deck. And then in the sideboard, things like Plague Engineer are just really good. Collective Brutality, again, really good. Lots of mainboard interaction. The hand disruption, like Inquisition of Kozilek, as well as Thoughtseize. And then cards like Lightning Bolt and Assassin's Trophy that are really good. Fatal Push as well. Liliana of the Veil was especially good because, like I said, I chose not to play the Dryad Arbors for the event. I didn't get too punished for it. They actually didn't play the Liliana of the Veils against me to make me sacrifice like a singular infect creature. The Liliana of the Veils that he played against me were actually like fairly bad. I think they just like killed off a Noble Hierarch or whatever, and then I killed them the next turn, something like that. But overall, Jund, of course, is Jund. Deck's great. Deck's absolutely fantastic right now. With the printing of Wrenn and 6 and cards like Seasoned Pyromancer and all these other kind of cards, I was a big advocate of playing just Black-Green Rock over Jund previously. With Modern Horizons coming out, I think Jund has surpassed Black-Green Rock, and so I think that Jund is a very reasonable matchup choice. But again, I practiced my matchup against Jund, was able to steal one game, was probably one top deck pump spell away from stealing the entire match against Jund, which would have been super sweet. But I did end up losing to this Jund player. Then after that, I went against Hogaak. This time against Hogaak, though, so I'm 2-1 at this tournament now, and I actually played against a fairly well-known player. Some of you may know him if you watch the Star City Games circuit quite a bit. His name was Paul Moeller. You can see here there's a ton of just finishes that he has here from different SCG events. Here you can see he was a winner of the Modern Classic here in one of the events. Just plays a ton on the SCG tour. And these are just his results from 2019. I believe he's put up some results in the past as well, like 2018, 2017, those years as well. So puts up some very, very reasonable finishes, very, very good player, and was playing the best deck in the format with Hogaak. But again, like I said, I practiced this matchup quite a bit, and I won the die roll, which was pretty important, so I was able to be faster than the turn 2 Hogaak. So I beat him on turn 2, game 1. Game 2, he beat me with his turn 2 Hogaak because I was too slow, and then game 3, I beat him just pretty much exactly how things were expected to go with play draw in the Hogaak matchup. I actually got a I got a warning against Paul when we were shuffling up for game 1. Obviously, I knew what he was on already. Like I said, I had the buy-in round 1, so I was able to look at what the good players were playing. You know, kind of keep that in mind. And I was shuffling his deck, and one of the cards fell out while I was shuffling it, and it fell over face up, and I saw that it was a Gravecrawler, so I ended up getting a warning for that. You get 3 warnings, and then once you get 3 warnings, it gets escalated to a game loss. But I did get a game warning against Paul. Apologize for it a couple of times, but like it happens. There's nothing I can really do about it. If the card would have fallen face down, I would have been perfectly fine, but because it fell face up, I got a game warning, but whatever. Got the win though, 2-1, so we are now up to 3-1 in this tournament. Not in the position yet where I can split and just intentionally draw with my opponent to get into the top 8. So I had to play one more round, and that was against Eldrazi Tron. So this, again, was a matchup that I practiced quite a bit. I knew what the important cards in the matchup were, mainly Walking Ballista, as well as Karn the Great Creator, and what potential hits they could find with Karn the Great Creator out of the sideboard. I knew that I was supposed to play around some Chalice of the Voids as well, because obviously 4 Chalice here is really good. Blast Zone put in some work against me as well, but I ended up winning this one 2-1 as well. Game 1, I just killed them, I think, on turn 2. I think they just played like map, Tron piece, or Tron piece map, Tron piece, pass turn expecting to crack map, and then I just killed them. And then game 2, I misplayed a little bit. I didn't have a return to nature to blow up a Chalice, so I felt like I had to hold up Spell Pierce to not just get Chaliced. And then I held up the Spell Pierce, they didn't play Chalice, and I probably then should have just started playing out my Infect creatures and expecting that they didn't have Chalice, but I chose to hold up the Spell Pierce again for an additional turn and got pretty punished for it, as they just played out, I believe, a Thought-Knot Seer, just going like Eldrazi Temple into Thought-Knot Seer. So I should have just played out my Infect creatures a little bit sooner, not worried about holding up the Spell Pierce. Got a little bit punished for that in game 2, but then won game 3 quite easily. I believe, again, on turn 2 or turn 3, I was able to mutagenic growth in response to a not Spatial Contortion, the other one, Warping Wail. Warping Wail says that you can exile a creature with toughness 1 or less, or I believe it's toughness 1 or less, maybe it's power. Let me just check it real quick. Not Spatial Contortion. What did I just say the name of the card was? Warping Wail. There we go. Warping Whale is... Yeah, exile target creature with power or toughness 1 or less. So again, that hits basically every card in my deck minus Spellskite. So there was a turn where they Warping Wailed on their turn. I Mutagenic Growth in response so that it was no longer a legal target, and then beat them on the next turn with it. So again, a 2-1 victory against Eldrazi Tron to move me up to 4-1 now in this tournament. And then that meant that I was able to split with my opponent and get both of us into the top 8. The opponent that I split with here was Ariana McKee, so thank you for the intentional draw, Ariana. She played a very sweet deck, 5-color Niv Mizzet here. So this takes us into the top 8. I believe 1 seed was... I don't remember the seeding in particular. I think it might have been Ariana. It might have gone Ariana, Mike, Jake, Bryson, either Bryson or Jaren, followed by, I believe, whatever. It doesn't matter too much. I was the 6th seed going into the top 8 after the intentional draw. If I would have played, I probably could have ended up, I believe, the 2nd or 3rd seed. But the ID, just to make sure that I was guaranteed to be in the top 8, was obviously the correct decision. But being in the 6th seed, it meant that I most likely was going to be on the draw for a large portion of the top 8. Being the 6th seed, I played against the 3 seed in the quarterfinals, in the quarterfinals. So I was against Jake Flexzinski here on Hogaak. He was a very good Hogaak player, very good player in general. He showed up with, the jersey on, showing that he was, obviously a good player, had the sponsor in the middle, and showed up with another teammate as well who also top 8'd the event. So obviously there were some good players. Just a very basic Hogaak list, nothing, too out of the ordinary. Pretty simple. Yeah, nothing too crazy, just a pretty simple Hogaak list here. Game 1, he was on the play, I was on the draw, so he just ran me over. Game 2, he kept a 1-lander with, I believe, Faithless Looting and Stitcher Supplier, along with a black-red source, and then just didn't get there. Just didn't draw a 2nd land, and then I killed him fairly fast, and he had a Fatal Push as well, I believe, and I had the protection spell for the Fatal Push. And then in game 3, we had a very, very close game where so it came down to him just having a million creatures on the board. He had a Hogaak, double Vengevine, and some other irrelevant like 1/1s, 2/1s. And I had lethal in my hand, and I think he knew that I had lethal in my hand, so he knew that he had to either find a way to kill my creature or to find a way to kill me that turn. And so he Faithless Looting, I believe, twice that turn, still had 1 black source left up and 1 card in hand. If that 1 card is Fatal Push, I lose the game. If that 1 card is literally anything other than Fatal Push, I win the game. And so I tried to think about if there was any way I could play around Fatal Push, realized there was no way that with my current configuration of lands and needing to activate an Inkmoth Nexus that I had no potential way to play around the Fatal Push, and just attacked him, gave it the 1 pump spell, hoped it was enough, and he extended the hand. It was not a Fatal Push in his hand, so I ended up beating Hogaak again in this tournament. 3rd time against Hogaak that I beat them in this tournament, 3-0 against Hogaak on the day. I said I wanted this matchup going into the event. I got the matchup, and I did exactly what I said I was going to do, and I took it down, which is very, very good for the self-confidence, we'll say that, knowing that I came in practicing this match so much, and then actually getting the chance to play through it, and then coming out on top 3 times against the best deck in the format 3 times that day. Very, very good feeling. So that was against Hogaak in the quarterfinals. We're on to the semifinals then, and I get to play against Mike Roan here, who is on Elves. Elves is a very, very good matchup for me. They have nothing to block Inkmoth Nexus. They have nothing to block Blighted Agent, as no deck has anything to block Blighted Agent, but they don't have any interaction to kill Blighted Agent. Don't have any interaction for my creatures in general, aside from being able to block a Glistener Elf if I don't have a Distortion Strike in hand. And so these games went very fast, even though I was on the draw. Game 1 I won on turn 2, and Game 2 I won on turn 3, so it was a very, very quick quarterfinals, which means that I solidified myself in the finals of this tournament, which meant that I qualified for the Star City Games Invitational because the top 2 got to qualify, so I was very, very happy about that. Even just making the finals was good enough for me at this point. And this is a very sweet Elves list. Even with Plague Engineer being around, Mike has managed to put up some very good results with Elves recently. I believe he said this was his third IQ top 8 in a row with Elves, which is just very, very good. And I think the deck's a very solid deck. I really like Elves. 2 Scavenging Ooze in the main seems like a very good call. And yeah, really like this deck. So shout out to Mike. I know Mike actually watches some of my videos and sometimes stops by my stream. So if you're watching this, Mike, again, congrats on the top 4 finish, and thanks for the games. So that means that we are on to the finals now, where I went against Chris here. Chris Ayali, I guess is how that would be pronounced here, who was on the Urza deck. I actually didn't know this until I just took a look at this, but I clicked on his name just to see if he had any other finishes. He was the player who also showed up with Jake with the jerseys on, showing like looking very professional and things like that. So I clicked on his name here just to see if he had anything, and he has a third place finish in a Legacy Grand Prix, which is pretty legit. That's super sweet, super sweet. Um, just yeah, obviously third place at any Grand Prix is a big achievement, and Legacy being a tough format as it is, that's just a really big achievement. So it was really cool seeing that afterwards. But he was on the Urza deck, the deck that revolves around some Urza, as well as the previously banned combo of Sword of the Meek along with Thopter Foundry. Previously, Sword of the Meek was banned, got unbanned, didn't really do too much, but with the printings of some of these Modern Horizon cards, like Goblin Engineer, Urza, Lord High Artificer, as well as, where is it, 4 copies of the Arkham's Astrolabe to go along with some of your snow-covered lands. The deck has really put up some fantastic win rates. It's just a very, very good deck. I felt like I had a pretty reasonable matchup against this as well, but because we didn't want to, if losing the finals feels, not the best, so we just decided to split the prize money and then just play for the bragging rights of who would be, labeled as the winner of the tournament. So we each ended up with $300 and an invitation to compete in the Star City Games Invitational. So that's pretty sweet. And yeah, again, he was on the Urza deck. I felt like my matchup was pretty good. Game 1 went according to plan. I ended up just beating him fairly easily. Game 2 was interesting to say the least. It was really late. We both just kind of like wanted to get these games over with, but we were also having fun playing. So he was doing things like whenever he would activate his Urza to like shuffle his library, I would like pull out one card in particular and put it on top and then flip it over. And I was very good at that sometimes. I would hit a lot of his, like, he was ahead on board at the time, and I didn't have like infect creatures. I was actually trying to kill him with regular damage. I had him down to like 3 points or something like that with Noble Hierarch, so if at any point I just like ripped Distortion Strike off the top, I was probably going to win that game with regular damage. Unfortunately, it didn't happen, but we definitely had a blast playing that game. We did things like off of his Urza triggers, I flipped a Dead of Winter as well as a, where is it? I guess it was main board, as well as an Ensnaring Bridge, which again, when you're ahead on board, you don't want to cast those cards, obviously. So that was a very interesting game 2, where I tried to win with regular damage and just didn't get there. He had quite a bit of sideboard interaction in terms of things like 2 copies of Fatal Push, an additional Galvanic Blast, Collective Brutality, those sort of cards. Thoughtseize as well comes in. And Chris was also, I forgot to mention this, Chris was the 5 seed, I was the 6 seed, so he got the play, I got the draw. So I was on the draw all the way through the top 8 and still managed to win with this deck that's very reliant on being on the play sometimes. So that's very, very sweet. So yeah, that was game 2. Tried to win with regular damage, didn't get there. And then in game 3, I kept a very, very sketchy hand. I kept I kept double Inkmoth Nexus with a bunch of green spells and a Pithing Needle. So I turn 1 Inkmoth Nexus, Pithing Needle his Thopter Foundry, and then attack for 1 point of infect the next turn with the Inkmoth Nexus, and then he sees I have 2 Inkmoth Nexus in play. with nothing else. So he plays Goblin Engineer, and normally Goblin Engineer sticks either the Sword of the Meek or the Thopter Foundry in the graveyard, and then just brings it back the next turn. He put his Pithing Needle in the graveyard, ready to name my Inkmoth Nexus with his Pithing Needle, which would have been very, very bad for me. But me, being the luck sack that I am, ripped my second copy of Pithing Needle off the top on that turn to then name his Goblin Engineer so that he was unable to return his Pithing Needle back, and I was able to continue attacking with my Inkmoth Nexus for my infect damage, and then I ripped the green source the next turn so that I was able to start having access to the green pump spells in hand. It ended up coming down to him, like, he cast Thoughtseize a couple of times and just didn't really have too much going on, but he hit a couple of good draw steps in a row, and the way that the game ended was I had the Inkmoth Nexus in play along with, it was Inkmoth Nexus, Snow-Covered Forest, I believe, was what I had, and I had just done something to draw a card. I think it was cracked a Waterlogged Growth to draw a card on the end of his turn, and I got a Mutagenic Growth, and then I drew for my turn and got a Mutagenic Growth, which was great. He was empty-handed and in play had a Pyrite Spellbomb, so I activated my Inkmoth Nexus, attacked him. He activated his, or he was at 8 Infect, so I needed to cast the pump spell first. I attack him, cast Mutagenic Growth for 2 life, and then he Pyrite Spellbombs in response. I Mutagenic Growth in response again, and he extends the hand. I win the entire tournament. The crowd goes crazy. You know, the crowd didn't really go crazy. There was like 4 of us there at that point, but you guys get the point. So it was very, very sweet, and ended up managing to take down the SCG IQ. And now this picture exists of me holding up $300 over here, my prize winning, showing off the Cardsphere hat, which again, this video is sponsored by Cardsphere, as well as all other content that I make here on the channel. And when I go to the Invitational later this November, I will be repping some Cardsphere merch at the event. That'll be quite a bit of fun. I already talked to them about that, so that's pretty sweet. And then also at Star City Games Invitational Qualifiers, they used to hand out pins that would say like SCG IQ top 8 participant or something like that, and then they stopped doing that. So Eric, being the great game store owner that he is, started making his own little these little squirrels that have a little helmet, the initials of the White Knight's game room here on the shield that the squirrel is holding up, and then the position that you ended up finishing in over here on the squirrel. So my own little trophy here, nothing, you know, too fancy, but I do own a squirrel now with the number 1 on it, which is pretty sweet. So very, very happy with my overall performance at this event. I felt like I played really well. And it was overall just a great day of Magic. So if you guys do want to, you know, maybe test out my list or something like that, you guys can go to Star City Games and check it out here on Star City Games, or you can go to MTG Goldfish and also see my list over here on MTG Goldfish, which is pretty sweet, knowing that I've used both of these websites before in previous videos to showcase other people's decks, and now I'm able to use them to showcase my own deck, and not, you know, putting it up there myself and having other people actually post the deck list for me. Very, very cool feeling. And I'm ready for this invitational. I'm ready for November to come around so that I can see what I can do with this invitational. Maybe put up a relatively okay finish. We'll see how it goes. Not too sure, but I'm excited for it, I'm ready for it, and it should be a ton of fun. So if you guys did enjoy this tournament report, be sure to let me know down below in the comments section if you guys want to see more of these to come in the near future. I really love doing these whenever I do well at a competitive event, because I love talking about competitive Magic. It's one of my favorite things to do, up there with playing competitive Magic. So I have a ton of fun making these videos. Like I said, this video was sponsored by Cardsphere. Go check them out. Link will be down below in the description. Head over to my Twitch channel as well, twitch.tv/Alby is live, where I believe this weekend, maybe towards the end of this week, probably this weekend, we'll be doing an IQ winning celebration stream where I'm probably just going to stream the 75 cards from Infect, just, quite a bit. Maybe I'll do it some other point this week, so maybe like Thursday night or something. I don't know. I don't know when I'm gonna do it, but be sure to go over there and follow the stream so that you get notified whenever I do this victory celebration stream with some Modern Infect. Definitely gonna be a fun time. Thank you guys so much for watching the video. Be sure to leave a like, subscribe for more content to come here in the near future, and I'll see you guys here next time for another Magic the Gathering video.